What's up, gang? Thanks for listening to the Undiplomatic Podcast, the show with undiplomatic takes about the foreign policy scene. I'm Van Jackson here with the homie Matt Dust. How you doing, man?
What's up? I'm doing all right. You know, all things considered.
All things considered. That's the eternal caveat of the Undiplomatic Podcast.
Oh man, especially now, I'm just trying to keep my chill.
Yeah.
On the brink of the apocalypse. But anyway, how are you?
I mean, basically the same. I mean, you know, one of the reasons why it was like worthwhile fitting in this episode amid, I mean, what we both have, I think, is like a really harried schedule. And in fact, Julia's traveling right now, so she's also pretty harried.
Yeah.
It's like we need the catharsis. We need, I don't know, society needs our hot takes. That's what I'm certain of.
I need your hot takes. Society needs our hot takes. We're just,
it's public good. Okay.
Right.
Well, first up, and probably like most recent and most perishable in the public mind, is the vice presidential debate, which happened, I don't know, less than 48 hours ago, but somehow it's already feeling like ancient history.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, what were your thoughts? Foreign policy figured into it a little more than I expected.
Well, no, at the top. I mean, I was kind of shocked, like right out of the gate. You had this wild question about Iran's nuclear program, you know, both inaccurate. I mean, the question was, you know,
of war.
Iran, the question was that Iran could produce a weapon in a matter of weeks, which is, of course, not true. I mean, experts think they could enrich enough uranium for a weapon.
There were a lot of not true things said in that. Yeah.
Right. Many of them by, you know, the candidates, mostly Vance.
Yeah.
But that one was said by the moderators, which I was surprised by because, you know, Margaret Brennan tends to be, at least on foreign policy, I think, of the kind of Sunday morning hosts, a low bar, let's acknowledge, but like really does tend to be one of the better ones on foreign policy. So I was really surprised at that one. But the question, I mean, yeah, a wild question. You know, if Israel, you know, did a strike on Iran's nuclear program, would you support it? You know, a wild question to lead with, but of course, both answers were disappointing.
Yeah.
The correct answer is no. That would be very bad. We should not support it.
That's the last light you would want to greenify for Israel, you know?
Right. You know, and there was something of a debate, you know, then they got into, okay, why is Iran here now? Why is their nuclear program progressed? And it's, of course, because Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear agreement. But also, you know, it would be great if someone Walz had been able to mention that there is as yet no evidence that Iran has decided to weaponize its nuclear program, despite the fact that the U.S. and Israel seem to be trying to convince them to do that every single day over the past. I mean,
we couldn't be pushing them harder toward
right. No, we have.
Crazy.
It's hard to imagine what we could be doing to make a nuclear deterrent more attractive to Iran right now. It's really crazy.
Yeah, that was troubling. There was the Walz, you know, I think everybody understands he kind of shit the bed on the China answer, which was like a technicality kind of thing. Like the moderator asked, you know, what's this deal with like you saying that you were basically in Tiananmen Square in '89 and the dates don't quite line up with when you were there, and all he had to do was be like, I misremembered, or the dates were off by a couple months, but guess what? I was still there in '89. There was like so many ways that could have been handled, and like he just kind of
he had this long. It seemed like he, you know, if you remember the Chewbacca defense, I mean, where you just try to confuse the jury, he just really kind of spun out all this stuff. I was like, just say, listen, I misspoke. I was, you know, but I was in China, but not there at the time. Like, as you said, I mean, it could have handled it very simply, but he kind of went on this weird digression before kind of landing where he should have landed at the very beginning.
Yeah. If you took his initial answer on like how he saw sort of democratic protests in China and the Chinese crackdown and all that stuff, and then he turned it around on Vance a little bit, some of that answer was like a nice little answer for a different question. And it was almost like he
yes, that's right.
It's almost like he heard the key word like China 89 and then got triggered to say a bunch of shit. Like,
so I hope he uses that answer in the future in a more appropriate context, because it was decent stuff. It was just not the answer to that question at all.
Yeah. I mean,
And I
what do
will
you think
say
of well, good,
what I think of what?
Vance overall?
Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, I thought he did very well. I mean, he just kind of had to not be super weird. But no, I thought he was. He his delivery was good. He's a good speaker, a good debater, and I think as I said a few pods ago, I think one of the few who thought his RNC speech was very very good, and that's the same thing. When he has the talking points, when he knows what he wants to say, I mean, he can deliver it. He can deliver the kind of MAGA nationalist right, illiberal agenda in a digestible way, and that is very concerning. And I think we saw that. I saw that on display um, the other night, saying a number of things that were patently untrue. And I think that exchange where he was like, "I thought we weren't going to fact check." I mean, that was
That's an
magical.
insane
That was
statement.
really magical. Um, and so yeah, I mean, he kind of did what I think he needed to do, and it's I'm uninterested in saying, well, who won the debate, but it's just like, what did both of them do what they needed to do for their for the principle,
Mhm.
and I think he did, and I think by the end, I think Waltz certainly had improved, and he got, of course, the great clip at the end about, do you agree that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election, um, which was good.
Yeah.
But overall, I think Vance helped himself and helped the ticket more.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the thing that's always troubled me about Vance is like his rank opportunism, no matter how demagogical, no matter how sort of like evil. There's this willingness to just do what power wants, and that is so
Hmm.
dangerous. But then
Yes.
also like there are lots of people who are like that. The thing that makes him different is that he's smart. Like he's not an idiot. He's polished. He's unpopular. Nobody likes a person like that, but like he's he's it's scary because a lot of these MAGA people are the MAGA elites, I should say. A lot of MAGA elites are like dimwits. They're like ethno nationalist Veep, the HBO show, but
Hmm.
he's smarter than a lot of them, and that's a pretty scary proposition.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the thing that I thought Walls struggled with, I said this on Twitter, like he continuously was trapped on this rough terrain. I guess this is a theme of the show on some level, but like the Democratic Party has embraced a version of nationalism, just that it's shot through all of their policies, and it favors the right kind of
Yeah.
predictably. And so what we end up with is that like JD Vance has a like pretty coherent pitch for American ethno nationalism as a response to like
Mm.
everything, from like on Iran, on China, on climate change, on the economy. It's like ethno nationalism all the way down. And the Democratic Party does not endorse that, but they endorse like the broader logic of it. And so you end up seeing JD Vance responding to a climate change question with being like, and that's why we need to reshore supply chains, bring it back home. And like, what is Waltz going to say to that? No, we shouldn't reshore supply chains when that's what the Biden administration is basically doing.
Right.
Like when it's like with the great power competition thing. It's like national flag versus national flag. If you
Right.
accept that premise, then the right's going to win the argument every time because you're going to be stuck trying
Yeah.
to argue for like a more rhetorically humane version of the same kind of shit. Same with border policy and immigration.
Yeah.
So Waltz has a difficulty, or he had a difficulty, and will continue to have a difficulty contrasting his vision and the Democratic Party vision from the Republicans,
Yeah.
except for to bring up 2025 project, which you know Trump doesn't want to associate with publicly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wrote a piece after the Democratic convention where I addressed this a little bit. Where I noted the Biden administration's post neoliberal agenda and the way this could be fashioned to not only a domestic but an international pro worker agenda. And I think
Oh,
an
that's right.
asset
Yeah.
that the Democrats have is that Biden actually did infrastructure week instead of just talking about it for 4 years. He actually did some things that have invested in manufacturing and jobs. So they have some accomplishments to run on, but I totally agree. Um, the right is always going to win. They are always going to re-raise on nationalism. It's just it's kind of a bidding war that is designed for them to win. But I think, in addition to having actual accomplishments for the Harris ticket to run on, I think there's a way to make the arguments about, listen, we are going to do things that benefit American workers and American communities, but we're not going to do this in a zero-sum way. And I know this is something you and I agree on. We cannot make this a zero-sum competition between American workers and Chinese workers, American workers and workers anywhere else. We're going to rise or fall together. Our security is deeply interlinked. Now, that may be a bit more of a complex argument to make than just like, we're going to do everything for us and screw everybody else. But I think that's the right argument and potentially a winning one.
Yeah, we'll see. We're gonna get to China in a minute too before we close out, but we should probably also so the vice presidential debate inconclusive. They did what they needed to do.
Yeah.
It probably won't be very memorable.
Yeah. Ultimately, I don't know that's the thing. I don't know who's going to care. The question is, did they hurt? I don't think either of them hurt.
Yeah.
If anything, I think Vance just helped himself a little bit more than Walz did. But I will say this too, like, I was concerned and I was glad I didn't see, because I remember back in 2016 with Tim Kaine, who was Clinton's VP, who was well known as a nice guy, who is a genuinely nice guy. And like, he came out and he just acted like a complete attack dog against Mike Pence, completely uncharacteristic, like clearly uncomfortable playing this role that they had assigned to him. And, going after Mike Pence, whose views I think are horrible, but who is kind of, at least outwardly, this kind of nice sort of aw shucks, and it just really like hit poorly. So I'm very glad they just allowed Walz to kind of be Walz. I thought that was right.
He's a great politician, Walz. Yeah. It's just he's you're constrained by your circumstances, and his circumstances, I think, don't optimize his talents.
Yeah. He was clearly nervous at the top, but I think he kind of eased into it.
Yeah,
that's where where the China question came. But like, I think he kind of chilled and relaxed.
Yeah,
the course of the first 30 to 45 minutes.
Yeah, it's the big leagues too. Like, that's a huge, huge fucking step up.
Yeah.
Okay, well, another related news, maybe less perishable, but still past. Ta-Nehisi Coates, the eminent scribe, writer, captures the Black American experience today better than like anybody I know. But he has a new book called The Message, and he went on CBS Morning Show to promote it. And this went viral as hell. You know, and so that he's talking about, like, in the book and on the interview, this point of the book is like advice to writers, which is kind of the Edward Said thing of like, see from the standpoint of the victims and use your pen to change the world in that way. And I mean, that's the rough gist. I haven't read the book, but the fucking, like, one of the co-hosts, this guy, I don't know if he's white or Jewish or what, but like Tony, whatever his name is, he immediately, who apparently has like a pre-existing relationship with Ta-Nehisi Coates, before Ta-Nehisi can say anything, he sandbags him with all of this shit about, like, if I stripped your name off this book, it would be if I took the fancy title away, this would be in a backpack of an extremist.
Right.
Which is to say, like, you should be on a no-fly terrorist list for this book, which is fucking insane.
No, it really was. It was amazing for, like, just to watch him kind of reel off these talking points.
They were like talking points for real.
So that anyone who has worked on this issue and engaged in debates with the right on this issue, to just like by rote, you didn't mention this, you didn't mention that, you didn't mention this.
Doesn't Israel have a right to exist?
And by the way, are you a terrorist? It was just so. But also, it was deeply gratifying to watch the way that, like, Ta-Nehisi just kind of leaned back and
Yeah.
respectfully but firmly was like, nah, and just handled it. And that's, I think, what was beautiful about it. It's like, because he's heard this too.
Yeah.
He was well aware of what was being thrown at him, so he just let the guy finish his kind of cute little rant, and it just kind of came back and addressed the very core principles. Like, nothing of what you said justifies apartheid, which is really what comes down to.
Do we
Yeah,
want
it's
do you live in a
yeah,
tiered do you wanna live in a tiered
right,
society or not? It's
right,
that simple,
yeah. Even if you grant all of that dude's kind of premises, which we shouldn't,
Yeah.
because like none of that justifies apartheid. Period.
Pretty wild. Yeah.
Yeah,
I aspire to respond to enemies as coolly as he did. Like,
yeah.
I can't.
But no,
Wild.
that again. I think that's what's coming. So I think
Yeah.
people need to understand, like, you know, Ta-Nehisi very rightly has been celebrated for his really perceptive, thoughtful, um, writing and thinking about race and the history of America and white supremacy and all of this, but applying those same principles to Israel Palestine is really gonna throw some people off, and that's what he's finding. Because like a lot of folks who consider themselves good liberals are so like emotionally bound to this idea that like, oh, this is different. It's much more complicated, and
Mhm.
here's a whole set of reasons that I need to believe so I can be okay with this.
Progressive except for Palestine, right?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly, that's what it is, yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't even know if this dude on the show is progressive. I'm guessing he probably doesn't consider himself progressive, but yeah, we see this even from people who consider themselves good liberals and progressives. Even if they're not gonna be as hardcore, as that dude was, there's still an element of like, "Oh, it's complicated," and sure, in some ways, the history is complicated, but, like, what you're witnessing because, of course, I've been to those places he's talking about. I've, been to Hebron many times. I've led groups to Hebron with Breaking the Silence, the group of IDF veterans that he worked with and went to Hebron. And once you see that, I mean, there's no explaining that.
Don't unsee it either. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, I mean, the thing that I think saved Ta-Nehisi, and I think that's an object lesson for everybody, and probably implicitly, like, this is what he's writing the book about too. Like, he was able to respond so firmly, so
Mhm.
crisply, and it didn't there's no way he knew he was gonna get sandbagged like that. It
Mm.
was because, like, his ability to respond competently, dominantly on his feet like that is
Yeah.
because he had moral clarity,
Mm.
because he had a coherent worldview, because he was extending principles derived from his
Yeah.
own observation of Black America
Mm.
to the Palestine situation.
Yeah.
He was seeing a continuous
Right.
sort of humanity there. And like if he didn't have that clarity, if he was just carrying talking points, like you're just practiced at PR,
Mm.
he would he would have stumbled on that. And I think a lot of people would have stumbled. And I think that's part of why everybody's so impressed by his
Yeah.
response. But it's like that response doesn't happen if you don't have the moral clarity and the vision and the analytical basis for it.
I think that's right, but I also think it doesn't happen unless you've actually been there and felt it and smelt it. And I'm not saying he couldn't have written about it without going there. I think
Mhm.
people can read different accounts of what's happening. But again, this is
It's
why
unshakable from
yeah, but
experience.
this is
Yeah.
again why I've led a number of different groups of journalists and analysts on these trips in cooperation with others, since 2010. I don't know how many groups I've led because I realized like once you go to these places, once you see how it functions, once you see how your Palestinian colleagues cannot walk with you as an American down this street, as you
That's
talk about,
fucked. That's
it
fucked.
is completely fucked. Once you actually see that up close, and then you come back through the looking glass to the debate as it happens in Washington, no one's going to tell you different. I mean, they continue to try to gaslight you. Oh, you didn't really see what you saw, but once you've seen it and smelt it and felt it, um, no one's going to tell you different. That's why it is really important to have that.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is for like Ta-Nehisi is special in a way because I wrote this in the newsletter. reflecting on all this,
Yeah.
because he is this insider. Like, I compared him to like the successor to James Baldwin, but like
Yeah.
I meant that in a very literal way, because Baldwin was one of these New York elite writers. Like, he was part of that intellectual
Yeah.
circuit, and a lot of them were, sort of left, not really
Mhm.
liberal. I mean,
Yeah.
Hannah Arendt was in this mix, some like commentary magazine guys, but like he had entry into that society, and then he
Yeah.
used his pen
Yeah.
to advocate and to push a worldview that was based
Yeah.
on an experience of injustice and all of that.
Right.
But like he got nothing but fucking hate mail and FBI surveillance for that shit.
Yep.
And right
Right.
now, Ta-Nehisi, he's got one foot inside the tent because he built his name up in those earlier Bush and Obama years when
Yeah.
all this stuff was less like politicized. And so he got street cred as an
Mhm.
insider, and he gets invited to the high holidays at the guy's house and all this shit, you know, which is fucking weird. But like I mean like that was proof in the interview of
Yeah.
like Ta-Nehisi being an insider, and that's the
Yeah.
thing that sort of protected him and got him onto the platform.
Yeah.
And as an insider, you don't go against the flow. You don't speak out against the larger consensus, or else you don't become an insider for very long.
Yeah.
Eventually you end up with an
Yeah.
FBI tail on you. And
Yeah.
like he and so like credit to Ta-Nehisi for speaking out. I do
Yeah.
wonder how long he'll stay on the inside though, if mainstream opinion doesn't change.
Mm.
I don't know. Um, all right, well, shout out to Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Yes.
Related, I mean, Middle East policy, there's so many things that could be said. Could you like
Mm.
summarize what's been happening the past couple weeks? Like last time we touched
Mm.
base, it was the pager
Yeah. Yeah.
detonations, right?
Yeah.
It, like what's been happening? Things are escalating very quickly.
Yeah. So, shortly after the pager attacks, we've just basically seen Israel, turn to the Lebanon front. Massive bombardment. Like I think last week, Monday or Tuesday, it was some over 500 people killed in one day. And now we have
It's worse
they're
than
calling
2006, right?
it is no very quickly.
Yeah.
And we're having what is called a limited incursion into Lebanon, or in Russian, it's referred to as a special military operation. Um, and it's just all this all over again.
I'm
And,
glad you drew that parallel. That was
yeah.
good.
But I mean, what was also wild here is you have Biden doing this same kabuki about, if that's okay to call it whatever it is, this
I think it's
routine of
okay.
like, oh, we're gonna get a ceasefire, pushing really hard for a ceasefire, and then Netanyahu's like, nah, didn't agree to it, gonna go ahead and do this, and then Biden's like, oh, okay. I mean, it's just, I just don't remember, I want to say that Biden seems helpless, but I'm also like, no, he's going along with this.
Well, did you see
Um,
that Politico piece too that said Brett
yeah.
McGurk and a bunch of administration people greenlit this fucking incursion into Lebanon? Like,
Right. I read that, and again, like McGurk has been like a focus a lot of, I think, rightly, because I mean, I think his he has been like a singularly pernicious character in this administration and before. But again, I'm not going to absolve Biden for any of this. I mean, McGurk is there because Biden wants him there.
oh yeah, it's one team,
So
man. I mean,
yeah,
that's
it is one team, and Netanyahu. And you have, and I have a piece coming out this week, this coming week in the New Republic on the anniversary of October 7, where I say this and more. But it's like you see these pieces coming out now on the anniversary of October 7 by these kind of, they're not necessarily friendly journalists, but they are clearly helping to frame up a first draft of history where just like Biden kept on trying for a ceasefire, but Netanyahu just kept on doing these. It's like, no, man. No. Biden had the option of using real leverage, which he simply chose not to
the
do.
leverage.
Right.
Where's the costs? How
Right.
many times have we fucking said this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I'm just not buying it. Okay. Maybe I don't doubt that he was frustrated, but the limits there was this piece in Politico, Biden, seeing limits of influence on Israel. No, these limits were self-imposed. Biden took these tools off the table early on, and Netanyahu did what was rational. He did what he wanted to do, because Biden had made clear he would not impose real costs. He would not create disincentives for doing otherwise.
This is a fucking nightmare, man. For one thing, I'm kind of glad that I'm not a Middle East expert in the sense that I feel like to engage in Middle East policy is to just be gaslit by powerful people constantly.
Yeah.
Like an analysis, there's no real analysis underneath anything.
Mhm.
It's just
Yeah.
talking points and advocacy
Right.
on behalf of just demented aims.
Yeah.
But like, okay, so carrier strike group goes to the region. We're still aiding Israel as there's a genocide ongoing in Gaza, and as it expands incursions into Lebanon. We have these state directed terrorist attacks via the pagers. We have 50,000 troops in the region now, which is insane.
Under what authorizations? It's unclear. Yeah. Just just
The
going there.
the war mania that
Yeah.
narrates itself as
Yeah.
anything but
Yeah.
is like, I can't, like, it's fucking wild. And
No, it is.
anything McGurk or anybody else is going to say about this that's not a condemnation is
Yeah. No,
complicit.
I mean, I commented earlier on Twitter earlier this week. Is like there are very strong, birth pangs of a new Middle East vibes in Washington right now, and that is terrifying. If people remember that quote from Condoleezza Rice
I was
back
going to say
during
that sounds very
the 2006 Lebanon War, where it was clearly a catastrophe, a clear failure of the Biden administration's policy in the region, and Rice tried to put a happy face on it to say like, "Oh, this is a new opportunity to do new and great stuff," and it was offensive then, but it's even more frightening now because that's like there's this sense of like, "Oh, yeah, Israel's like knocking out Hezbollah, and they're turning their attention now to Iran, and they're resetting the table, and we're just going to redesign this region in a way that is more advantageous to us." It is crazy. It is crazy, and it's evidence that once again we should have put way more goddamn people in jail for the Iraq War.
Yes, sir. That's fucking there. That's the root of some of this is the failure to
Zero
punish
accountability.
bad judgment. Yeah,
Right. Right.
yeah.
These
Pretty.
people are still sitting over at the Council on Foreign Relations and the various think tanks. They're still giving talks. They're still invited on TV. Shoulda put them in jail.
Instead, they name chairs after them at think tanks. Yeah, this is fucked. This is fucked. Okay, well, I guess rounding out things, China policy. There was a couple pieces out that I just wanted to kind of like name drop. And then I wrote a thing about former Congressman Mike Gallagher because he had this
Mhm.
kind of crazy idea.
Yeah.
So like one piece was in World Politics Review, and I think it was by Michael Swain, but it was
Yeah.
just arguing basically like the Democratic Party and the Biden administration have become ultra hawks on China. And like Swain is like a restrainer type, but he's
Yeah.
also extremely well respected in like
Yeah.
the China hand community. Like he's well known, and um, it's kind of it's the first time I've seen somebody who's like not me kind of call out the Democratic Party for
Mm.
being hawkish, too hawkish on China,
Mm.
and like this ultra hawk designation. I think people bristle at it,
Yeah.
but like that's how if like just use as a baseline. What
Yeah.
would the neocons as of 1998 have wanted, or 2003,
Mm.
right? What was the Trump administration's, which we thought of as extreme? What was their preferences and
Yeah.
policies on China?
Yeah.
Well, the Biden administration has outbid all of that, you know?
Well, I think he noted some of that, but I mean, at one point in that piece, he also noted that Kirk Campbell, who is very hawkish on China, has
Mhm.
called a regime change a very bad idea, which, it's a low bar, but appreciate that.
That's a very low bar.
Yeah, very, very low bar. But yeah, I mean, he was also kicking through, of course, some of the people who could be expected to populate a Trump administration on China policy, and
Mhm.
it's bad news.
Yeah.
But I really dug your piece, on Gallagher and Palantir, because I mean, it seems pretty clear. Like anytime there is a Lord of the Rings reference, that's a bad organization. That's a bad organization, just straight out. Right
Yeah.
away.
That's a good
Palantir,
point.
Anduril, all these just, it's trouble. So,
Yeah. They're like really leaning into mystifying
yeah.
what they're into, what they're doing. So, like, yeah. So for people who don't know, Mike Gallagher, he was like the kind of McCarthyist chair of the China Select Committee, congressman. He kind of checked out after a pretty surprisingly short period in Congress, and he's vice president or something at Palantir, which is a company that exists on national security contracts, basically. But he had this. He spoke at this right wing conference, nominally nonpartisan conference. There were like FDD, CSI, who's who of whatever right wing stuff. But at the conference, he proposed the idea of, let me find it. Every time a Chinese ship rams a Philippine vessel, we should quietly place another small team of Marines or soldiers in the southern Japanese islands or northern Philippine islands. It will continue until such a point that China stops threatening one of our treaty allies. And so, like, what's crazy about this is that, like, of the many bad ideas that Gallagher's had, this might be like one of the least bad. Like, this isn't World War III directly or anything,
Yeah.
but and it's not, there's no like direct racism in it either. But
Right.
Jesus.
Yeah, right.
Like, so like that's a low bar. But I mean, this is I there were many ways to like criticize this. I chose the sort of neutral language of the cost exchange ratio, which is
Mm,
obviously unfavorable. Like, anytime you're doing strategy stuff against a supposed enemy, if you want to repeat that interaction with your enemy over and over, you have to make sure it costs them more than it costs you. And his idea would do precisely the opposite. It would cost us a shitload,
mm,
separate from like the infeasibility of it, separate from the fact that we have troops flowing to the Middle East right now, separate
mm,
from the like not in my backyard NIMBYism stuff of forward basing in East Asia, separate from the claims, the confirmation bias that China would have, because it already assumes that we're militarily encircling it. And so if we do that more, is that going to change their calculations or confirm their calculations?
mm.
You know?
Right.
So problematic in a number of levels. Yeah. Um, and then there was a piece in FT by Financial Times by like the most sort of reaction. I mean, he's like he identifies as a
Yeah.
reactionary. I forget the guy's name, but
Yeah. No, I read it, and yeah, it was. Go ahead.
oh no, but it was his argument was basically converging with the Rivalry Peril,
Mm,
co-authored by Mike Brennis, coming out in January
yeah.
2025,
Can't wait.
endorsed by one Matt Duss.
That's right. Yeah.
But like
The check's in the mail, though, right? I mean,
there
come
we
on.
go. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So the Rivalry Peril, like one of the sort of sub arguments of the book is that the China threat and great power competition is not a force of cohesion or unity of the
Right.
nation. It's a divisive force.
Right.
And this piece in the Financial Times by this right wing guy uses different kinds of arguments, but he reaches that exact same conclusion. It's like the piece is called "The China Challenges Isn't Bringing Americans
Right.
Together."
Like, I think that's good news. It's like I read that piece and I was like, "Well, that's great." Because yeah, as I've written elsewhere, and this is something that Senator Sanders focused on too. Like this idea that we're going to rebuild America's political consensus through threats, whether it's Russia or China, um, is a dangerous game. So I read that piece where he's like, "Wow, this isn't working. We're promoting the China threat, and yet it's like, yeah, no. I mean, this
Oh
is good.
shit.
Let's
Yeah.
like maybe like let's rebuild an American political consensus around an idea of like shared prosperity and dignity and equality. I don't know, crazy idea, but let's do that instead of like, oh, the new enemy.
This is there's something meta here about like the left versus the right and how we think about this stuff. Like, I feel like we're constantly trying to expand the franchise. We see something good and we want to expand it. We see something bad and we want to shrink it. And like the right's view is always like, security, prosperity, these are scarce resources. They're zero sum. They're predicated on regimes of exclusion, like my security is going to mean your insecurity. And like that's kind of a meta thing, but it's there constantly.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
No,
Um
but it's also like, it's just if you want, you can select for that evidence, right? You can look at World War II, and this is kind of the function that World War II, because it's like the go-to comparison for everything in foreign policy from
Yeah.
Munich forward. Um, oh yeah, we came together, around the fascist threat, and like lifted ourselves out of the depression, and built. We sent these young boys to fight, and yeah, there's a lot that's praiseworthy about that. There's a lot that's horrible, especially after the war when we maintained this kind of militarized Keynesianism,
Mhm.
um, which was not great.
Not great. Yeah. I mean, like, that's part of the context that brings us to our sort of dystopian moment now. Like, you can't romanticize one specific moment in history
Right.
and one literally unique kind of war in history
Yes.
and then like generalize from it,
No.
Like,
Or generalize, but use it to kind of baptize just constantly, whatever new war you want to get
yeah,
into.
World War II washing everything
Yes,
militarism,
that's
basically. Yeah.
exactly right. Yeah, there's a great book. I think I probably talked about it on here before, by Elizabeth Samish. She's an historian at West Point, called "Looking for the Good War," where she talks about
Oh yeah.
like the uses of World War II, in our debates, constantly returning, and especially in the '90s, during the big 50th anniversary, the series of anniversaries that came, through the '90s, the Greatest Generation, all of that.
Mhm.
Um, which others have commented, like kind of primed us to to launch a new global war
Yeah.
after 9/11. That really did not work out well for anyone.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, ending on a positive note as usual.
Yeah,
So,
but we're here now doing this podcast, so we're not going to make those mistakes
that's
again.
right. If you listen to this podcast, surely you're inoculated from these false lessons of history or whatever. One hopes. So, all right. Well, anything else? I think we covered a lot here.
I don't know. I probably should have prepped a movie rec for the end here. Talk about your new movie podcast.
Yes, the Bang Bang podcast. For those who don't know, Lyle, Jeremy, Rubin, and I. So we're both military veterans. We're both war critics, anti-war advocates, you might say. But we're also film junkies, which we have in common with you, Matt. And so we have this podcast called Bang Bang Podcast, which is a show about war movies and military movies, but with an anti-imperialist twist. So we're doing it. We're kind of meeting people where they are when you see things like A Few Good Men and Hunt for Red October, stuff that like is in our memory bank that we
Mhm,
sort of know and love or hate in some kind of way, but it's there, and
mhm,
then exploring that and our feelings around that, and then relating our experiences within the national security state and the military, like unpacking all of that and sifting through it to see what kind of lessons there are, what's the untold story about all this stuff, the true costs that are being borne, how much of these heroic stories are really propaganda, all of that, what's the role of film in
mhm.
shaping the culture and then in shaping the politics and all of that. So that's what we're doing. It's at bangbangpod.com, and you can subscribe, and it's super fun just talking about, like, these current events things are important but also depressing a lot of times, and it's like more just fun to talk about a movie,
Right. Well,
even
I'll
when
be
it's
sending you a list of movies I would like to join for. So,
yes. So if you go to letterboxd.com, we have, and it's at Bang Bang Pod too, like we have the running list of all the movies that we're going to watch, but we're also constantly kind of adding to it. And yeah, we need to know which ones you're keen to jump on,
cool.
and that will be fun, man.
All right, man.
All right. And then I forget. I don't know. I need to like script an outro for this show, 'cause I never know what to say. But good to see you.
We're out. Good to
And
see
we're
you.
out. All
All right.
right. Thanks.